recording. Do you see a timer on the top left?
Do not.
No.
Yes.
Yeah.
That
Okay.
says yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Perfect. So what I'll do is I'll start the podcast welcoming you, and then we'll go straight into you can tell a bit briefly about yourself.
Okay.
And you're the dean, right?
Yes.
The dean of the
The
School of Business and Leadership. Is that what it's
no,
called?
it's continuing professional education.
Okay.
That's going to be the School of Leadership starting in July. But
Oh, nice. Nice.
yeah.
Nice. Well, welcome to another episode of Navigation and Discovery with Cameron Singh. I'm here with a very good friend of mine, Dr. John Barnette. Dr. Barnette, thank you for being on the podcast.
Thank you, Cameron. It's wonderful to be with you.
Yeah, so just to give you a little bit about how I know Dr. Barnette. So, Dr. Barnette is the Dean of Continuing Professional Education at the University of Charleston. And we got to know each other very well when I pursued my doctorate of leadership at the University of Charleston in West Virginia. So, Dr. Barnette, tell us a little bit about your background and yourself.
Thanks. My background is in basically in three areas. I was in the military for 44 years. I was drafted into the Army and culminated that career after 44 years with promotion to Major General. I was a commander of the West Virginia Army Guard from 1995 to 2010. And was also at the same time in a dual hat position as the chief of staff with the 8th Army in Seoul, Korea. And also the second leg, I served, my military career was active and reserve. And I had a 25-year career as a CEO of a behavioral health company. And then since my retirement from the military in 2010, I've been with the University of Charleston primarily with the leadership program, serving as the dean and also as a faculty member. And that's where Cameron and I work together in the doctorate of executive leadership program.
Well, that's awesome, Dr. Barnette. So, one of the things throughout my years being with University of Charleston, one thing I cannot forget is I think you gave this speech a couple times or really your story is your experience in the military, experiencing the recovery efforts of Hurricane Katrina, and I really think that's a spectacular story. I know where you're in education right now, but historically you were in the military. So walk us through that experience and what you learned from that.
And that probably, Cameron, was the highlight of my leadership experience as well. I'd in the West Virginia Guard had been one of my responsibilities was as a task force commander for FEMA declared natural disasters. And we have 55 counties in West Virginia. And during my tenure, all 55 counties had been involved in a natural disaster at least one time, and a total of 70 to 75 such experiences. And so I'd done that. And then, when Katrina hit, I was actually in Korea. And my boss called me on my way home and said, could you go and take a group down to Louisiana to help the Louisiana National Guard recover? And I'd been watching, along with everybody else, the building of the storm and whatever. And just the magnitude of it was awed by it. But so I told him I'd be glad to go. And he said, I think you'll go down for 2 weeks. And what we want you to do is to take a crew with you and relieve the Louisiana Guard because many of them have had family members affected. They've lost their homes, they've had deaths, they've lost pretty much everything, and relieve them until they can get settled and get back in the recovery effort. So I was one of those things that you never forget. I was on the way home from Korea when I talked with him. I think I actually was in Japan. And when I got the flight back to Charleston, we'd planned to meet and then get the group together and leave early afternoon. But when I got to Charleston, the airstrip closed. We actually had a malfunction on the plane. And so we couldn't land in Charleston as we had anticipated, and actually landed in Bristol, Tennessee, in Virginia, in the tri-state airport there, which is about a 5-hour bus trip back to Charleston. So I got home after leaving Korea, not sleeping for a day and a half anyway. And that bus trip, and still met the schedule to leave to go to New Orleans. I had selected 30 key people, 30 some key people to go with me that had been on many of those flood and bad weather situations in West Virginia. So they were very experienced. So I wanted to take the right people with me. And we flew down on a C-130 to Belle Chase Naval Station. And I was able to go up in the cockpit to kind of do a aerial survey, and it was devastation beyond belief. That whole area is under sea level, and so it had extensive hurricane damage, but also, as you know, the levees had broken, and there was water every place. And being below sea level, it's like soup in a bowl. You pour it in, and there's no way to get it out. And their traditional pumps had been underwater as well, so they didn't work. And so you had this situation. And when I got there, it was about the 4th or 5th day, and it was the region was totally decimated. And General Tackett, when I got on the ground and was able to talk with him, asked me how bad it is, and I told him, the 80-mile stretch from Charleston to West Virginia to Huntington. I said, if you take all that area, everything in it, and just destroy it, talking about all the infrastructure, hospitals, medical clinics, fire departments, police departments, schools, if you take all that and destroy it, and then multiply that by 14, you get an idea of how widespread the devastation was. So, Cameron, when I got there, and for the first, it was the largest military airlift since World War II. We actually moved in 42,000 troops over a 3-day period. And when I got there, I found that there was no organization, no structure, no mission. What I found out later that the states have been asked to do is to send as many people as quickly as you can to Louisiana, and we'll kind of figure it out when we get there in terms of what we're going to do, because there was not really a national plan for a disaster of that magnitude. So part of the challenge for me was to know exactly what to do. And when I said earlier, it was the most challenging time for me as a leader, because there was no mission, no one clearly in charge. There was no resources, if you will. We'd been asked to take water and food for 3 days. And when we landed at Belle Chase again, there was no electricity. The base had been evacuated. It was a naval air station, and they had moved all their planes and equipment out. So it was basically empty, but then it got hit by the hurricane, so it had extensive damage as well. And one of the best examples of leadership that as we started working together initially as an ad hoc group um, of senior officers who, again, with no clear plan, we knew we had this major airlift, and we've kind of connived with the pilots who had taken their planes out and come back. So they actually served as air traffic controllers, and they also operated inloaders to remove equipment and those kind of things that were starting to come in. So in essence, we had about 40,000 people on an airstrip in really intense heat, and then no way to move equipment out of there other than to stockpile it as it came in. So those pilots from the 159th Fighter Group actually operated the sixth busiest airport in the world for 4 days without a single accident, which was an amazing feat. So anyway, I hooked up with the my counterpart from Louisiana, another at that time Brigadier General Hunt Downer, and Hunt and I talked, and he said, "How are we going to do this?" And I said, "Well, do you have a plan or do you have an idea?" And he said, "Well, no, you're senior. You be in charge and I'll be your deputy." And I said, "Well, no, it's your state. You be the commander, and I'll be your deputy." And it was funny. We instantly, had a wonderful relationship. And I said, "Have you done this before?" And he said, "No." And I said, "Well, I've done similar things 70 plus times. So you be in charge, but do what I tell you." And that worked out really well. It ended up he had been in the Louisiana legislature for 29 years and was Speaker of the House. And he has a great sense of humor. And he said one of the great things about that experience, he served 29 years without getting indicted in Louisiana, which was quite an effort. But we put together an organization and created a structure for it just out of creativity and imagination, because what was it most like? And we created a concept called a direct support brigade. And then we set up an initial operations group, and that was going to deal with what was right in front of us. And that was to continue the evacuations and the rescue piece. And then a short-term planning group that was trying to figure out how we're going to start getting things opened up a little bit. And we said that group would take 72 hours to a week. And then we said we really need to bring a group in to plan for the longer recovery. So we created a structure, and I think the key to it was separating the operations from the planning, and then planning from short and long range. And I think my background and experience in kind of organizational leadership helped with that. But another really, I think two other really significant leadership pieces was the Coast Guard was there, and they did, Cameron, almost 14,000 rooftop rescues over that period without, again, a single loss of life in the rescue operation itself, which was phenomenal because the communication was not good, and the weather was not good, and the conditions on the ground were deplorable. So these were people still hanging on the rooftops and that kind of stuff. And the other piece of that was just really came out of creativity and imagination is this group of junior leaders we tasked with setting up an operational headquarters, and they basically created means to assess and diagnose the situation and establish communication when there really was none with anyone. So we had some special forces operators that we sent with that group, and they went out on the ground and really could discover where the problem areas were and beginning to start the recovery. But it was, all those 70 things that I had done before really paled in comparison. This was of a magnitude that I'd never experienced, never thought about really. So it was quite an operation. And I mentioned earlier that I was planning on staying 2 weeks, and ended up being about 7 months, all told, before we could get it to the point that it was recoverable then. Lots of other issues that came up from dealing with the situation on the ground, from dealing with some corruption, those kind of things that were not anything that I had ever thought about or planned on, but just came about it in that unique situation there. Might answer any questions you might have about it.
Yeah, Dr. Barnett, that's a really amazing story. And so what was some of the leadership lessons that you took away from that, or how did you grow yourself as a leader through that experience?
Cameron, the first thing is to, we always talk about it's important for leaders to have self-regard and self-awareness. And I had 10 years experience leading a major organization and had done all kinds of things. We'd had the deployment experience, and we'd really emphasized leadership in the West Virginia Guard and education. So we had the most educated workforce in West Virginia. We created a tuition assistance bill in 1995. So at that time, about 6% of the Guard had a degree, and when I left in 2010, 78% either had a degree or were involved in it. So it had people who were really capable and understood leadership and leading where you are, if that makes sense. And it was a challenge for me personally, because I'd never experienced anything of that magnitude, with no organization, no mission, no laid out resources, just saying, can I do this? And, what is it that I've got to do? And so that first 24 hours was a real challenge for me personally, because I said, I can't bring all these people here and just have them sit here on the airstrip in all this extreme heat with no food, no water, no bathrooms. We've got to figure it out. And so after I got over that, can I do it? And I've said, you're going to give it your best shot. Then I think that was the first real challenge. And then, you had to create, as a second phase of it, some kind of instant vision that people could buy into. And one of the best examples of that is many of the troops that were coming in had just come back from deployment in Iraq. And they were all battle tested, but they were coming into New Orleans assuming it was like their last battle station, where there was an enemy out there. And it got compounded because there were some rumors of shooting in New Orleans itself. And so many of the people came in with the mindset of we're here to restore law and order and take control, if you will. And one of the things that we did overnight was to create an alternative mindset of, no, we're not here. We're not going to be armed. We're here, and we created a thing which you see a lot now, but it was called Neighbors Helping Neighbors.
Yeah.
And we created these bumper metallic, and again, that group that I talked about that was most creative. I have no idea how they get things done. Got um, signs for all the vehicles that were magnetized so that we could slap them on everything we were doing. And it says neighbors helping neighbors. And that became the theme of the campaign. So the second challenge after I decided, I had to do something was to change the mindset from this is not a battlefield to this is neighbors helping neighbors, and we're reaching out to people in need, and to create that mindset. And I had to actually send a couple of people home who did not want to disarm their troops. That they were not wanting to buy into that, and that was a problem for a little bit, but not very long. And going back to what I was mentioning about the shooting, really what that turned out to be were kind of the drug lords fighting over territory. When the flood hit, they wanted to expand their area of operations, so they were actually in some skirmishes among themselves. Then I mentioned corruption before, and it was not totally new to me because of my Army experience, but where bribery is a way of life. And a couple of instances of that, we were, General Downer and I were setting up a food operations, and the person who got the contract, and again, that contract was let before the water was receding. So I don't know exactly how that happened beforehand, but the person running that said, I'm authorized to pay you up to $2,500 to make sure things go well. And so we had to set him straight that, we're not to be bribed, and, it'll go well if you get the food where it's supposed to be and on time. So that was an example of that. Another one, there was, and I think the following story. Several of the officials went to jail and that kind of stuff after that. But the police, it was reported that when they were called back to work, a third of them didn't come back. And when we explored that further, we found that they were never there to begin with. They were phantom employees who were receiving checks of some type. So, a number of those type things, just in making sure that we didn't allow any of that stuff to damage the reputation of the military and the Guard in particular. So we had to make sure that people were tuned that they were not to take bribes or gifts or whatever else for special favors, and those types of situations people will do, when they're desperate to get help for their areas, they'll do things they normally wouldn't do, but you have to be cautious about that. And so those leadership things ranged from, where do I sleep? And, I wanted to be visible, because everybody was miserable. I wanted them to know that I was miserable with them. So I slept on my Humvee hood and encouraged them, because of snakes, to not sleep on the ground, but to sleep in the area. And that was another just thing you have to do leadership wise, to demonstrate that you are empathetic and you understand, but you've got a mission to accomplish.
Yeah, so Dr. Barnett, with this experience, I feel like it's very applicable to those listening, whether they're within an organization, in education, and whatever avenue in government. And oftentimes, people are tasked with these leadership roles where it's chaos, right? It might not be a Hurricane Katrina, but figuratively, it might be literally where things are going underwater, things are chaotic. And what advice do you have for those that could be in those roles now, or might encounter that in the future and feel like they might not be prepared for it?
Yeah, I think, a couple of basic understandings, and people debate the difference between leadership and management. And leadership for me is right-brained, is creativity and imagination. and it's future oriented, and leading people through whatever it is to where they wouldn't necessarily go by themselves. And management is kind of the left brain, history and experience. And the way I think about it, Kim, most simply is that you need to lead until you can manage, meaning that, you, as we did in Katrina, you create structure and you create order, and then you manage it until you have to lead again. And a really good example of that happened there is that after about, I think, 25 days or so, everything was getting fairly routine and normal, and the management kind of stuff. And then Hurricane Rita reared its ugly head, and so we had to lead again, making decisions, not because we hadn't experienced that there yet. But do we stay? Do we leave? How do we get ready for the aftermath of that while we're still doing this, if that makes sense to you? So again, we led in the initial phase. We got some procedures, some operations, some policies, even though they were temporary on that operation in place. So it was orderly, so you can manage. But then another crisis hit, so you got to lead again. So the way I think about it is, you have to lead until you can manage. Then you manage till you have to lead again. And you got to be able to know which is which, because when people and what organizations tend to do, in my opinion, is that when a crisis hits, they try to manage harder rather than lead. They create more rules, more control, more micromanagement, if you will, rather than recognizing this is chaotic, this is complex. So we've got to put on our thinking hats and our creativity and our imagination and figure it out. Not because when we manage it harder, it tends to get worse, because we lose the engagement of people and of followers.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your story, Dr. Barnett. I think it's a really intriguing story, and also thank you for your service.
Well, thank you, and I'm really proud of what you're doing, Cam. We attempt to develop what we call scholar practitioners, and you're exemplifying that extremely well. So I commend you for it, and wish you the best in your future leadership journey.
Thank you. I'm trying.
I know you're trying.
But before we wrap up here, Dr. Barnett, and thank you for all that you did throughout, not only through my tenure with the University of Charleston, but our cohort. You were very instrumental in our each and every one of our successes, and you're truly a part of that story too.
Well, great, thank you. You had a wonderful group.
Yeah,
They're doing great things.
Yeah, the Dell Avengers. We still stay in touch every day, as we call it.
Yeah.
But speaking of that, I'm a huge champion of higher education, and I know you are as well. And so I talk about that in my book, Navigation Discovery. I dedicate a chapter to higher education. So, in your opinion, Dr. Barnett, working at the University of Charleston, you're also a huge champion of higher education. Could you tell us a little bit about why, because there's people listening that might be settled with, high school diploma or an undergraduate degree. Why should individuals look to strive for higher education? And what's the true value of that in your opinion?
I think that it's related to the why. For instance, lots of people who have 20 years in the military come out of that experience with really good direct leadership experience, and they can apply what they've been trained to do, but they may not understand the why, and sometimes when the how doesn't work, why it's not working, if that makes sense to you. And when I say that the difference between a master's degree and a doctorate, for instance, the master's can summarize knowledge, and the doctorate can create new knowledge but you have to be able to have that summary of knowledge first. And people are pretty good about, it's fairly easy to take things apart and criticize and whatever else. But the real challenge is to put it back together in a more meaningful way through synthesis and collaboration to add to the body of knowledge, if you will. And I think only education does that. So I'd encourage people, only about 1.5% of the population has a doctorate. And there's a reason for that, but that 1.5% has a tremendous impact. And so in leadership, particularly, we want them to do it in the right way. And that is kind of, as we talk about the inside out, people have initially strong character and competence, and then knowledge. And then again, the leadership ability to make a difference with that. Again, as you're doing with kind of creating that awareness and understanding of leadership. That I don't you could do it, but not to the level or extent and the meaningfulness that you're doing now with your education.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for that, Dr. Barnett. And what are some of the sorry, let me start that over again. Thank you for that, Dr. Barnett. What are some of the programs that University of Charleston has to offer that people are thinking about pursuing higher education?
Yes, we have leadership degrees, and again, different from business leadership, if you will. For frontline leaders, and that's an associate degree. Then we have a bachelor's degree for the organizational level. Then at the corporate level, for the supporting roles and action officers and project managers, et cetera, we've got a master's in strategic leadership, and we culminate with your degree with the doctorate of executive leadership for those that either want to lead at the highest level or make an impact on developing leaders through either education, coaching, mentoring. And you find that the leadership thing is like the genie in the bottle. Once you take it out, you can't put it back. So most of those people who go all the way through and get the executive level doctorate do a combination. They teach, they train, they mentor, they lead, they write. So once you take it out, going back to the genie, once you take it out of the bottle, you can't put it back. So you lead wherever you are, and you make a difference. And sometimes in a very crass way, you recognize stupid when you see it, and you're obligated to fix it.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's awesome, Dr. Barnett. Thank you for all that you do at the University of Charleston. And, if you just impacted me and my fellow cohort of 8 people, so I know you're impacting in really in multiples with what you're doing in the area of leadership.
Cameron, thank you again.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your story, and thank you again for being on the podcast and taking the time out.
Glad to do it. Best of luck to you.
All right, thanks.
Bye.